I remember on my 29th birthday, I was out to eat at a restaurant with some people from the church, including my mom, and suddenly I just had a moment where I started breaking down, crying at the table, and I said, I'm afraid I'm gonna end up committing suicide. Hey family, it's Getty here from Not Finished Yet, and this is part 2 of my testimony of how I became weed free. And this part 2 is specifically about how God set me free supernaturally. So, it's been a 2-part weed testimony that I'm grateful, so grateful to be able to share with you. And I'm thankful to God for bringing me this far and being able to set me free from the grips um, that weed had on me. And it's so funny because I'm walking through this park right now and I smell weed in the air, because someone close by is smoking it right now. So, anyways, I'm just grateful to God, and I don't have my extended stick with me for to hold the phone, so I'm doing it by hand. Um, it's incredible. It's incredible the way that God did this to break me away from my addiction to weed, cannabis, marijuana, whatever you want to call it. Um, I remember, especially during the beginning stages of the pandemic, um, from later in 2020 to 2021, sometime in 2021, was the first time I began to um, experience some heavy, hardcore anxiety and suicidal thoughts, and of course the depression, and even like some kind of like fear, trembling, paranoia, all of that, all of these manifestations that I started to undergo, that I started to experience, was coming through to the forefront. And I never dealt with something like that before. Usually I've had minor occurrences or minor instances of things like anxiety and depression, and there were some rare times that I had suicidal thoughts, but it wasn't like something that was consistent in my life. It wasn't something that happened very often. So it was something new to me. And like I said, this first started to transpire during the time of the pandemic. And I didn't know what to make of this. I mean, I was fighting for my life. I was fighting for my mental stability. I was fighting just to survive, seriously, like to keep going another day. I didn't know really how to deal with this. I was reaching out, of course, to many people in my life, trying to get some help, trying to get some encouragement. And, you know, it brought me to seeking some professional help for really one of the first times in my life, some counseling and therapy. And there was a time that I came to ending up, I did a video about this. I did my story about ending up in a mental hospital, in a mental facility, for the first time in my life, in 2021, after I had a breakdown. I had a mental, spiritual, emotional breakdown, and I ended up in the mental hospital for the first time in my life, again, during this pandemic time. And God got me through those moments. He got me through those times. By His grace, I was able to get through that season. Um, but then it came back, you know, it came back upon me. After a while of relief, and again, I was still using marijuana. I was still using some other substances like psychedelic drugs and stuff. And I was thinking like, oh, well, maybe this kind of like helped me get back on a stable place, maybe I'm good now. So I continued to use these kind of things until I experienced the same kind of symptoms again, some anxiety and suicidal thoughts. The suicidal ideations came back. That was the heaviest thing for me because I didn't really know how to deal with that. I was afraid that I really might end up committing suicide. And I say all of this because it's what led up to me reaching a breaking point when it came to the smoking of the weed and using that. Because when I wasn't smoking weed, I was still feeling these things. I was still feeling anxiety. I was still feeling on edge. I was still feeling some fear. I was still having suicidal thoughts. That's when I wasn't smoking the weed. But every time I went to go smoke, it would just increase those sensations. It would increase those kind of reactions. So it would intensify them. So during that time um, of dealing with those kind of things and then trying to smoke weed, it just made it worse. So I reached my breaking point in September of 2022 um, when I said, okay, God, every time I go to smoke weed, it just makes my condition worse. It intensifies it. I get even more anxious. I get even more fearful. I get even more paranoid. I get even more suicidal, like having increased suicidal thoughts. So I kind of got the message. I was like, okay, God, I'm just gonna like put it down because I know what you're trying to tell me here. So I'm gonna need your help um, to stop smoking. So God gave me the grace to be able to not do it anymore. Um, there was something I was gonna say though. Sorry guys, I'm not sure if there was something I was gonna specifically say, but I think I wanted to mention that during this time of having those symptoms, those experiences, those occurrences of the anxiety and the fear and the depression and the hopelessness and the despair and the suicidal thoughts, God was still leading me through that in a special way where I would wake up at like 5 a.m. at one point each morning, trembling. I would be trembling with like anxiety and fear for some reason. That was just over me. It was a thick cloud that was over me. I would wake out of my sleep so early and my body would be trembling. It'd be shaking. And I would read a psalm in God's word. And I had a journal that I would write just a little note about what I'm going through, what I'm dealing with, and also something that related to what I had read. So God was even leading me through that desert, even in that time, and He also brought me out of that mental facility, and I started to see progress after coming out of there, and I didn't need to go on the antidepressant medication or anything. So there were miracles that God did. And of course his providence and provision through that time. But I also wanted to add, like, through my years of smoking weed, I never had any kind of ill effects, really, such as like anxiety or paranoia or fear or any of that, really, or suicidal thoughts when I smoked weed for all those years. There would be like some, you know, rare occurrences where I'd kind of feel a little shame or embarrassment being around someone if they knew I was high or they could smell it on me, or I'd be a little nervous, or in certain circumstances and stuff. But usually I never had those kind of um, side effects from smoking weed. So I didn't think much of it. I was like, I don't know why all of a sudden, every time I go to smoke weed, it just makes these feelings worse and intensify, you know? So I started to take note of that. And like I said, I got the message, what God was trying to communicate to me, that it's time to lay this down. Obviously, every time I go back to try to use it, it's just making me feel worse. I can't stress that enough. It's intensifying the suicidal thoughts. It's intensifying the anxiety. It's intensifying the fear and paranoia. So I said, okay, God, I'm not going to try it anymore. I'm not going to try to smoke anymore because I don't want this. I don't want this to be intensified. I don't want this to be made worse. But I'm going to need your help because I'm so used to relying on this. I'm so dependent on smoking weed. Like, how am I going to adjust to this? So, the first month, September 2022, 2 years ago, that was the beginning of my journey of being weed free. And I still remember that I was experiencing some of those things. I was still experiencing suicidal thoughts. I was still experiencing some anxiety and I was just on edge. I was just an on edge, nervous, kind of like fragile, sensitive person. I was just so broken up, you know. Um, Again, it was like something that spiritual warfare was intense, and it was happening over me and around me, and I could sense it. I could feel it, and the manifestations that I was getting was insane. And this continued um, for over the course of a year as it started to decrease more and more. Like I started to notice progress. I started to get less of those thoughts. I started to get less anxiety and stuff. And, to this day, I've made a lot of progress. I don't have those moments as much, but I remember even like 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks after not smoking weed, I was there on my 29th birthday out to eat at a restaurant with some people from church. And my mom was there, and I was at the table, and something triggered me where I just started breaking down, crying. And I'm like, I'm afraid that I'm going to end up committing suicide, because those feelings were so strong. I kept having suicidal thoughts every single day, and I didn't know how to deal with this. I didn't know what was going to make it better for me. But I continued to fight on, and I continued to press through. And as I persevered, as I leaned on to God, as I grabbed the hand of Jesus, He brought me through. Now I don't have those moments very often. There are rare times, or there are infrequent times where I'll have that moment of like, oh man, it's been like a bad day, or things are going bad. I'm thinking about committing suicide, but it's not in the same way. I know what helps me now. I know who to reach out to. I know not to entertain those thoughts, and it doesn't happen anywhere close to what was happening during 2021 to 2023. So I thank God for that. And I think one of the hardest things for me was adjusting to life without smoking weed. I was so used to this being such a big part of my life. Nearly every single day, smoking weed, you know, using it as a crutch, using it to numb my pain, using it as a dependent substance just to get by. And now I'm living my life without weed. I feel a lot better now, but trying to adjust to life without weed was a challenge. And sometimes it can still be a challenge just because I don't miss it. I don't really want, I don't think I'm going to go back to it. I don't see myself going back to it. I'm not really tempted by it like I was. But there's those times where I might think like, oh, you know, what if I just smoked to kind of like numb my pain? What if I just like went back to smoking a little bit to feel good? And I have defenses to push past those thoughts and temptations where I don't listen to those thoughts. I don't listen to those ideas. And I'm able to fight that temptation to pick it up again. There have been times where I found like weed in a container from a dispensary with a bunch of weed inside of the container. I found it on the street. I found the nearest trash bin and I threw it in there. I found several joints, pre-rolled joints, laying on the ground. Like it tried to come into my path to see what I would do, and I threw it away, you know? So I have no interest in going back to weed, especially after God set me free in that kind of way. I see it as God setting me free in a supernatural way because I didn't know when or how I was ever going to stop smoking or ever. I didn't even have it in my mind that I was going to stop or quit. I thought, I didn't really think much of it, you know, because I was so used to smoking. I'm like, maybe I'll just smoke this until the day I die. But God, not on my own power, God did something beyond my own power. He actually answered my prayer because I can't tell you how many times I would be smoking weed and I'd put some tobacco in there and I'd smoke too much and then I'd throw up and I'm like, God, help me. Take this away. Like, help me to stop. I don't want to do this anymore. And really, he just answered my prayer without me even realizing at the time. But it was really a prayer answer. And I just want to really compound that point of a supernatural way because it may not seem supernatural that, oh, you stopped smoking weed because it made your symptoms worse. It started to intensify your anxiety. Like, that makes sense. A logical, rational person would kind of get the hint and they would stop. But there were times where I was still having those anxieties and fears and suicide, and I would still be smoking. So I wasn't acting in a rational way. I would still be having all these like feelings, these negative feelings and emotions, and I'd still try to smoke weed anyways. And I did that for a while. And it wasn't me just getting the hint, it wasn't just me getting the message. It was God revealing, listen, this is the time to stop. I'm trying to show you that this is the time. Oh man, I want to cry right now. This is the time for you to stop. This is me. This is me showing you that enough is enough. And he used that. He used that intensity. He used that making my anxieties and fears and suicidal thoughts worse. So I would wake up. So I would get the message I'm like, okay, God, okay. He used that to break it off of me. Just break it off of me. And after I realized, okay, I see, I see, I stopped. I stopped picking it up. I stopped trying to smoke it. And I didn't go back. I didn't try to smoke it again a couple weeks later, even though I might have thought, like, oh, I have this last joint. I might just smoke this and then I'll be done. No, I still had a joint from the dispensary when I stopped smoking that I was tempted to smoke later. And I'm like, no, I'm not even going to risk it. God showed me what happens when I try to smoke. No. So I ended up throwing that joint away. But yeah, man, that's how God came through for me in a supernatural way to finally break this off of me. And I'm grateful to God, like I said, that I'm now able to celebrate 2 years this month. 2 years without marijuana. Grateful to God, man. You know? And I feel a lot better just continuing to walk in a sober life. You know, striving for that kind of life. Not relying on substances. There's still been other things, other substances in my life as well that God has been working off of me. You know, I made a video recently about using this thing called Kratom. I think I kind of just tried to replace one crutch for another crutch. And he's been working on me to take that away. You know, I've been struggling with nicotine. He's working on me to take that away. You know, so there are a couple other substances and stuff that I've used throughout my life, and I'm seeing God working to take it all off. You know, chip it away. I see Him chipping these things away off of my life. So I'm grateful to God for that. Um, what else did I want to mention in this video? Um, I'm not sure if there's much left to say, guys. I really just wanted to show how God set me free in that way. I hope to encourage you in some kind of way or inspire you in some kind of way. Maybe you're someone who feels God's calling you to be weed free, or you're still smoking and you don't really know why, or maybe you smoke for certain reasons and you feel like it's not a big deal. But I just, I can't speak to your individual situation. I just know what God made clear to me in my life. But I think it would be wise to not smoke it and let God show you, let God make it known to you what you really need for your issues or troubles, for your healing. If you're using weed for some kind of reason that you think is medical or emotional support, let God be the one to do it in a spiritual and natural way where you don't have to rely on any kind of exterior substances, you know, especially if they can be addictive, you know, but that's between you and God. You have to seek Him about that. I can't tell you what to do or not do, and you probably wouldn't listen to just a regular guy like me anyway, so the best thing to do is go to God about these things. But I've had my struggles with, again, just adopting a new way of life, um, seeing weed all around, being kind of programmed and brainwashed through media and music. that smoking weed is the way to go. It's a cool thing that everyone does. It'll make you feel good. It'll give you pleasure, and so I have to fight with the armor of God to resist those lies and temptations and those attacks. And God has been faithful to me to be able to do that. And I thank Him for how much progress I've made now. I think one of the worst things for me over the past couple years was to go through that suicidal phase, having those kind of thoughts and stuff. But again, God has brought me through every suicidal thought. He's brought me through every kind of moment that I thought I was really going to commit suicide. And like I said, I'm grateful to God that I've made so much progress. And it's getting better as the days go by. So that's my story. That's my testimony. I pray you guys were encouraged and influenced in some kind of way. And I thank you for watching. Peace. God bless you.